On an average July morning, a group of 5 friends paddles out from an entry point in northeastern Minnesota, permits checked, gear loaded, route mapped. They have been here before, most of them anyway, and that familiarity is the first thing that will work against them. The Boundary Waters is the most visited wilderness in the United States, and the comfort that surrounds it is not a reflection of its actual risk profile. It is a gap between perception and environment that, in documented cases, has proven fatal. Every year, roughly 150,000 people enter the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, a 1.09 million-acre expanse of glacial lakes, boreal forest, and portage trails in northeastern Minnesota. The BWCA holds more than 1,000 lakes and hundreds of miles of rivers and streams. 20% of its total area is open water. It stretches 150 miles along the Canadian border and looks, from the entry point, like a postcard. Calm, ordered, manageable. Most visitors arrive through outfitters in Ely or Grand Marais, organizations that have been running trips into the BWCA for generations and that communicate, through their professionalism and their cheerful route maps and their well-maintained rental fleets, a sense of institutional competence that extends into the wilderness itself. It does not extend into the wilderness itself. It stops at the entry point. There are no roads inside the BWCA. No cell towers, no urgent care clinics, no helicopter landing zones in most of the interior. The infrastructure that visitors associate with a managed recreational experience, the permit system, the outfitters, the portage signs, is real and genuine, and it governs the experience of entering the wilderness and moving through its established routes. What it cannot do is change the physical properties of the water, or the speed at which a summer thunderstorm moves across an open lake, or the temperature that the interior lakes maintain year-round, regardless of the air temperature on any given afternoon. The St. Louis County Rescue Squad covers the BWCA's search and rescue operations across a jurisdiction of approximately 7,000 square miles. An area roughly the size of New Jersey. In 2021, they responded to nearly 500 calls. That is more than one call every single day of the year, from a wilderness that most visitors describe as a peaceful paddling trip. Captain Rick Slatton, who has led the squad through some of its most complex operations, has described the pattern plainly. The biggest threat to somebody on their trip to the wilderness is themselves. When calls come in from the Boundary Waters, it usually comes back to either simple forces of nature or choices the individual made. Both categories, in practice, are more closely related than they appear. The illusion of safety in the Boundary Waters is more deeply embedded than in almost any other wilderness in North America, because it is reinforced not just by infrastructure, but by familiarity. The Grand Canyon is visually extreme, a mile-deep abyss that announces its own scale. The Boundary Waters announces nothing. It looks like a summer camp, like a fishing trip, like a place where families have been going for generations without incident. That appearance is accurate for the vast majority of visitors who go in warm weather, travel established routes, wear their life jackets, and make conservative decisions. It is dangerously misleading for the minority who read the calm surface of the water and the well-worn portage trail and the outfitter's confidence as evidence that the underlying environment is forgiving. The first illusion is that air temperature and water temperature are related in any meaningful way. They are not. The BWCA's interior lakes are deep, clear, and extraordinarily cold. Even in midsummer, water temperatures in the interior rarely climb above 60 degrees Fahrenheit. On a warm July day, with the sun out and the air at 75 degrees, the water beneath the surface of Crooked Lake or Tuscarora Lake or Knife Lake is cold enough to trigger a physiological crisis within seconds of immersion. A visitor who dresses for the air shorts, a t-shirt, maybe a fleece, has dressed for a different environment than the one their canoe is floating on. The second illusion is that familiarity confers safety. The Boundary Waters is unusual among wilderness destinations in the degree to which its visitors are repeat users. A substantial portion of the people who enter the BWCA in any given year have been there before, many of them multiple times. This familiarity produces genuine competence, better route finding, better campsite selection, better understanding of the permitting system and the portage network. It does not produce warmer water. It does not slow the current above a waterfall. It does not make a July thunderstorm less capable of generating 100-mile-per-hour winds. Familiarity with the wilderness experience is not the same thing as immunity to the wilderness's physical properties. The third illusion is that the established recreational infrastructure of the BWCA, the portage signs, the campsites, the route maps, the outfitters who have been running trips for decades, represents a kind of managed environment in which the most serious risks have already been mitigated. The portage signs tell you where the falls are. They do not stop the current above them. The outfitter's rental canoe is well maintained. It capsizes in cold water the same way any other canoe does. Start with the water because it is the Boundary Waters' most efficient mechanism for converting a recreational trip into an emergency, and because the mechanism operates in ways that are almost entirely invisible to visitors who have not been specifically told what to look for. The Boundary Waters lakes are deep, cold, and fed by a watershed that includes some of the oldest exposed rock on the surface of the Earth. The Canadian Shield bedrock underlying the region has been there for 2.7 billion years, and the glacial lakes sitting on top of it are cold in a way that is structural rather than seasonal. A few weeks of warm summer weather does not meaningfully change the temperature of a lake that is 100 feet deep. Visitors who arrive in July, when the air is warm and the surface of the water looks inviting, are encountering a thermal environment that is radically different from what the air temperature suggests. The surface may be relatively warm. A meter below, the water temperature drops sharply. A canoe capsize that puts a swimmer into the full water column rather than just the surface layer is a different physiological event than it appears from the shore. Cold shock is the body's involuntary response to sudden immersion in cold water, and it is not optional and not controllable. When the body hits cold water, the airways open and a sharp inhalation occurs, regardless of whether the victim's head is above or below the surface at that moment. If the head is underwater, as it frequently is in the first seconds of a capsize, the inhalation brings water into the lungs. Multiple canoeists have been found dead in their swamped boats, still in their seats, because they capsized, went briefly underwater, gasped, and inhaled before they could surface. They did not drown slowly. They drowned in the first moment, before they had time to process what was happening. Those who survive the initial cold shock face what researchers at the National Center for Cold Water Safety call swimming failure, a progressive loss of muscle coordination that sets in within 3 to 30 minutes of immersion in water at 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The limbs stop responding. Forward swimming becomes impossible. The body goes vertical in the water. The head can no longer be kept above the surface. Research on cold water drowning has found that nearly half of victims are within 2 meters of safety, a dock, a shoreline, or another canoe when they die. Not miles away, 2 meters. The distance is not the problem. The physiological state the water has produced makes that distance uncrossable. In May 2020, a man named Billy Cameron was canoeing on Tuscarora Lake in the BWCA when his canoe capsized. His group spent approximately 15 minutes in the water. After 5 minutes, their limbs were numb. After 15 minutes, one of them was drifting in and out of consciousness. Billy attempted to swim to shore. He was last seen close to it. He was found later, still wearing his life vest, dead from hypothermia. The air temperature that day was warm enough that none of them had dressed for cold water immersion. They had dressed for the air, not the lake. That gap between how the air feels and what the water does is where the boundary waters takes people. The tides of Southeast Alaska are the ocean's version of this same principle. The boundary waters has its own version in the form of wind and current on open lake crossings. The BWCA's largest interior lakes are several miles wide. A group caught mid-crossing when the wind picks up faces a compound problem: increasing waves, decreasing stability, and no option to wait it out. They are already in motion. Turning a canoe broadside to waves to retreat is often more dangerous than continuing forward. The choice the wind forces is not between a safe option and a risky one. It is between two risky options, made under conditions of increasing stress, in a boat that was never designed to handle open water weather. But the cold water and the open lake wind are hazards that experienced paddlers know about. However imperfectly, they assess them in the moment. The boundary waters also kills through mechanisms that are visible, mapped, and named on every route chart, and that kill anyway, because knowing where the danger is does not automatically produce the decision to avoid it. On May 18, 2024, 5 friends entered the boundary waters for a fishing trip. Among them were brothers Eric and Race Grams, who had made near-annual trips to the area for 17 years. They were not novices. They were not reckless by any ordinary definition. They were experienced BWCA visitors who knew the route, knew the lakes, and were headed to Curtin Falls on Crooked Lake, a 30-foot waterfall that appears on every map of the area and is one of the most visited features in that section of the wilderness. The portage trail around the falls is easy to find and clearly marked. They were fishing above the falls when one canoe got into distress. The other paddled over to help. Both canoes went over the falls. None of the 4 canoeists who went over were wearing life jackets. Eric Grams survived with a fractured pelvis. Kyle Sellers survived with a broken leg. Race Grams, 40, and Jesse Haugen, 41, were swept under and never resurfaced alive. The search operation that followed was the most complex in the St. Louis County Rescue Squad's 66-year history. 59 personnel, drones, a remote-controlled mini-submarine, a K-9 unit, a Minnesota National Guard Chinook helicopter, and a closure of portions of the boundary waters itself. The bodies were recovered more than 2 weeks after the incident. The falls that killed Race Grams and Jesse Haugen were not hidden. The portage trail around them exists specifically because the falls are dangerous. They had been there before. What removed every margin was the combination of higher than usual water, a moment of instinctive response, one canoe moving toward another in distress, and the absence of life jackets in water moving toward a 30-foot drop. The boundary waters does not offer margins. It is not built for them. The map can show you where the falls are. It cannot prevent the sequence of decisions that puts you above them without a life jacket when the water is running high. The dangers that kill people in the boundary waters are not always the ones on the map, and the ones that are not on the map are often the ones that arrive fastest. On July 4, 1999, a derecho, a sustained line of severe, fast-moving thunderstorms, swept across the boundary waters. Winds reached 100 miles per hour. In a matter of hours, the storm knocked down millions of trees across approximately 370,000 acres of wilderness. 60 people were injured. Campsites and portage trails were buried under timber that took months to clear. The derecho did not announce itself in the way that most severe weather events in the continental United States do, with hours of warning, tracked by radar, communicated through alert systems to anyone with a phone. Inside the boundary waters, there are no phones. There is no signal. The sky at 8 a.m. provides no reliable information about what the sky at 2 p.m. will do. This is the structural vulnerability that weather creates in the Boundary Waters Canoe area, and it is one that better forecasting tools have only partially addressed. Even today, a group that enters the Boundary Waters cannot check a weather forecast from the interior. They can check it before they leave, and they should. But summer thunderstorm development in northern Minnesota operates on timescales that make morning forecasts an imperfect guide to afternoon conditions. A storm system that wasn't visible on radar at 10 in the morning can be generating 60-mile-per-hour gusts by 2 in the afternoon. A group mid-crossing on a 2-mile lake at that moment has no good options. They cannot go back quickly enough. They cannot go forward safely. They are in the water's domain, in conditions the water was made for, in a boat that was not. Lightning compounds this exposure in a way that is specific to open water paddling. A canoeist on the open surface of a Boundary Waters lake is the highest point in the surrounding terrain. There is nothing between them and the sky. The standard guidance, get off the water immediately when lightning threatens, requires paddling to shore, which in the Boundary Waters larger lake crossings may mean covering a mile or more of open water while the storm approaches. The highest risk period for afternoon thunderstorm development is also the period when most canoe groups are actively traveling between campsites. And then there are the ones who simply don't come back, and whose cases illuminate a dimension of the boundary waters that the permit system and the portage maps cannot address. In October 2018, a 29-year-old man named Jordan Grider drove to the Boundary Waters from New Mexico and walked into the forest intending to spend the winter. He had lived in remote, wooded environments in Kentucky and upstate New York for the better part of a decade. He was not a novice. He sent a photograph of a beaver pond to his family on October 8th. He bought supplies the following day. After October 9th, there was no further contact. When his campsite was found in April 2019, more than 6 months after his last communication, it contained large amounts of dried blood, a loaded pistol with the safety engaged, all of his belongings intact, and a hammock that showed no signs of disturbance. Partial skeletal remains were recovered over the following months from the surrounding area. The exact cause of death was never determined by medical examiners. In October 2004, Nathan Williams, a college senior, drove to a forest road near Hog Creek on the edge of the BWCA. His truck was found at the trailhead. His wallet and clothing were found approximately 5 miles in. No trace of Williams himself has ever been located. In 2005, Lloyd Skelton went missing on the Angleworm Trail. His vehicle was at the trailhead. His clothing was found further in. It is believed he suffered from hypothermia severe enough to trigger paradoxical undressing, a documented physiological response in which a victim in the final stages of hypothermia perceives themselves as overheating and removes their clothing. Search dogs found no trail. No remains were ever recovered. The Boundary Waters is large enough and complex enough to hide evidence indefinitely. The The boreal forest's ecology is efficient. Scavengers distribute remains, water disperses what remains of clothing and gear, and the absence of roads means that large areas of the interior are never traversed by anyone who might stumble across evidence. A person who walks 2 miles from a marked trail and cannot find their way back is, in the critical sections of the BWCA, in a situation that search and rescue may not be able to resolve before the environment does. Here is what ties all of this together and what makes the Boundary Waters unusual among American wilderness destinations in its risk profile. The Boundary Waters kills people who are prepared. It kills people who have been there before. It kills people who were wearing their life jackets, and people who had decades of paddling experience, and people who had researched their route carefully and told someone where they were going. The Curtain Falls victims had made the same trip for 17 years. Billy Cameron was wearing his life vest. Jordan Grider had spent years living in remote wilderness. None of that preparation changed the water temperature, or the current above the falls, or the physiological reality of hypothermia in its final stages. This is what makes the familiarity illusion so specifically dangerous in the BWCA context. Risk perception research consistently shows that humans calibrate their sense of danger against their own past experience and against the experience of the social group around them. A visitor who has made 10 trips to the Boundary Waters without incident has 10 data points telling them that the Boundary Waters is manageable. They have no data points telling them what the water temperature was at the moment Billy Cameron capsized, or what the current above Curtain Falls was doing on May 18, 2024. Past experience in the BWCA tells you about the trips that went fine. It tells you nothing useful about the conditions under which trips stop going fine. Most deaths in the Boundary Waters are from drowning. Most injuries are from falls. Most victims had access to the safety information that was relevant to their situation, the water temperature data, the life jacket recommendations, the portage trail around the waterfall, and made, in a moment that seemed reasonable, given the totality of their experience, the choice not to apply it. They read the air temperature and not the water. They skipped the life jacket for an hour on a calm lake. They paddled toward a distressed canoe without calculating what happened if they also capsized. The Boundary Waters does not adjust its lethality for visitor confidence or visitor experience. It maintains the same cold water, the same unpredictable weather, and the same vast, roadless interior that it has always maintained, indifferent, consistent, and operating according to physical laws that were in place long before the first permit was issued and will continue long after the last one expires. It doesn't know you've been here before. Subscribe, because the wilderness doesn't warn you, and someone should.